So now that we have our level built and set dressed, let's talk about lighting up our level. Right now, we have our ambient light set pretty bright, so we could have, tested our level, see what was going on in it. It was merely for testing purposes. But you'll notice that the level is not really, it looks okay, but by today's standards, it looks really flat, not interesting. There's no atmosphere. It's just a bunch of random props kind of set together to create this basic bare bones level. You'll find that when you add lights and shadows, it creates a more complete level and adds a level of believability to where you're at. It sets a mood. So that's why we really need to go in and figure out how to put lights in this guy. Alright, so the first thing we're going to want to do is turn down our ambient occlusion. Okay? So let's turn down our ambient light. Let's make it kind of dark because we want to have a nice dark level. In my mind, this level just received a bunch of destruction and it needs to be a little bit dark because, only emergency lights on, perhaps. Now, let's go ahead and make a light prefab out of a point light and a light mesh prop. Before we do that, though, let's go over some of the different kinds of lights there are. For this to take effect, make sure that your light switch is turned on inside of your scene window. Make sure it's pressed. So let's create other, and we have 4 main different kinds of lights. We've already kind of gone over how you control your ambient light through render settings found in the Edit tab. If you want to add individual lights, though, let's start with the directional light. Immediately, you can see a noticeable change. In a scene, you'll really only want one directional light. Think of it as the key light, or a sun. If you change the direction, it globally lights everything in your scene according to the direction. And if we look in our inspector, we can see the different types of properties or components we have. The usual transform tabs are still there, and we have this light component. This allows you to control everything from the color to the intensity to cookies if you want to add a different look to it. So we could add a circle cookie, effectively turning this directional light into kind of a spotlight. But normally I don't like to use cookies in my directional light. Shadow type, soft or hard shadows. In the free version of Unity, the only light that has shadows is your directional light. So let's just turn off shadows for the time being. And we have a few other different rendering options that we'll go over later in the course possibly, or you can experiment with your own on your own time. So that's a directional light. It's basically your sunlight in the level. Alright, let's create a spotlight. So a spotlight is exactly what it sounds like. If you're at a play or whatever, a theater, you've probably seen the big spotlights they use to light a scene. And more or less, it's like a giant flashlight. It creates light in a cone shape, as you can see as I rotate and move the light around. And it also has specific components to it that give it different properties. The spot angle can increase the size. And of course you have the range, which increases the distance of the cone. So the larger the cone, the more area it fills and the farther the light travels, which also affects its intensity a little bit. And of course you can affect its intensity directly. So spotlights are really nice if you want to use a spotlight or have an area of your level with maybe a floodlight that's on and it's pointing down to a specific area and you want to highlight just a specific area from the sky. Spotlights are pretty nice. But the type of light we'll mainly be dealing with in this chapter is the point light. And before I go into point lights, let's go ahead and let's make a prefab out of the light prop. So I want to go into my meshes and let's bring in a light mesh. Alright, there's my light mesh. Alright, and for the time being, let's go ahead and make it 0, I guess. Alright. If you wanted to, you could make a new scene and have everything kind of go away and then make this a prefab, and then you can load your scene you're working in and use that prefab in your new scene. For intents and purposes, though, I'll speed things along just by working in the scene we see here. I already have my props material, so I'm just going to add that to the light, and immediately we get some textures on that light. Now I'm going to add a point light. Alright, you'll notice things kind of change in here. And think of a point light as a light bulb. Light radiates out in a 360-degree radius or sphere around this light. First thing we're going to want to do is position this light. You can even use the V key to snap the light. But the first thing we're going to do is we're going to position this light right in front of our little buddy here. Alright. Why don't we bring down the range of the light? Alright. And we can affect the intensity later. But this light has a blue lens, so let's give a blue tinge to our light real quickly. Alright, great. So now that we have our point light and our light set up exactly where we want them, let's go ahead and make an empty game object, create empty. We'll call this PFB light. And let's parent, let's make sure our prefab empty game object is set to 0, 0. And let's go ahead and set our prefab up. Let's drop our prefab light into our prefab folder. So I'm going to go through the process of maybe placing a light. Right now I'm moving the whole prefab. You'll notice, since it's a prefab, it moves both the light and the light mesh. And we can set this to maybe -90, and we can start placing lights in our level. So that's the power of a prefab right there for you. It allows you to not only have to go back and set every single light and go back and put all the point lights on the lights, it'll kind of just do it all for you. And then I can go down to my prefab light here, and I notice that it's a little too bright on that wall. I don't want that to happen to every single light. So why don't I just come up here and move inside of, while I have my prefab, to select my point light, and I can actually move my light a little bit away by tweaking the Z translation, and I can bring down the range a little bit. There we go. Maybe up the intensity, up the range. It's all about how you want to light this guy. If you're not seeing the lighting information, remember you have to turn on your lights right there. And it's all about just tweaking it the way you want. So there I got a light set up. And let's do a soft shadow on the light. You'll see that since you only have the free version of Unity, only real-time shadows can exist in the real-time. But this is free. We can still get our shadows inside of our light bakes that we'll go over in just a second. So go throughout your level. Place your prefabs, adjust its settings, put on some shadows on it, and then I have a scene already set up in which I've lit everything already. And I already have lights placed throughout my level the way I just showed you. Alright, so now when you have the lights set up, you can test your game. Lights are looking okay. See how much more moody and atmospheric it is? It's a lot better designed level right now. Great. Now we need to worry about baking our lights. So what is light baking? It's a method in which we set lights up in our level, and since none of the levels move in here, its shadows and its values are not going to change. All these meshes are static. So a light bake will basically set up another set of textures on a second UV map that will paint all the color values onto a texture map. So basically your level's not being lit in real time anymore. It's being tricked into thinking it's already lit up by a texture map. And that saves a lot on real-time lighting and ultimately your frame rate. So how do you bake a light? Well, let's go over it real quick. Alright, so we have our lights. Let's bring it out of our meshes folder. The first thing we need to do when we bake our lights is we need to select all of the meshes in our scene. Alright, and if you've got your hierarchies built pretty easily. It'll be pretty easy. You can just select your parent meshes thing. See how I have a props folder or a props group and a base level group all nested under meshes. You're going to want to make sure every single mesh inside of your game scene is set to static. Okay? I'll go ahead and unset on the static. So basically, you'll see the static button right here. It's not checked. We'll check it. And since it's a group and there's children, and this is the parent, yes, change all the children in the group. And this will effectively change every single mesh inside of your level to static. The next thing we're going to want to do is take all of our static lights that we're going to be using to bake our level and set them to static as well. You can already see I've done that. Alright, that's the first step in light baking. The next step is we have to go to our light baking tool. So we'll go to Window, we'll go to Light Mapping, and we see this new window come up. Okay, that's great. So we can see that we have a few tabs right here. And I'll go over each tab and what settings you need to set them at. Under the Object menu, select All. And if you have any previous light maps that you were working with, make sure to clear them. Alright, great. In the Bake tab, we have a few more options that we can use to set the light. We have dual light maps. Think of dual light maps as creating two separate light maps for far away light maps with lower resolution, and another set of light maps for your models that has higher resolution, and it switches over to those when you get closer to them. Forward rendering, don't worry about forward rendering right now. Leave that blank. That's for more advanced rendering techniques. Let's set our quality to high. Bounces only exist, I think, inside of the Pro version. Oh, turn that off. Remember, we want to uncheck forward rendering. You can bump up your ambient occlusion and play around with it. I found that 0.5 ambient occlusion works just pretty good. Works about good on everything. And our resolution here dictates how big our texture maps or our light maps are going to be, rather. So if we bump this up to maybe something around 200, then we might get more or clearer resolutions on our texture maps, or our light maps. I keep saying texture. These are our light maps. Under Maps, we don't have any light probes. That's a more advanced lighting technique that really is only used in Pro versions of Unity. And we'll leave everything as it is in default. Once you're done setting all the settings you want, you're going to bake your scene. And whenever you bake your scene, you're going to see some information down here, like it's in the process of baking. And it could take anywhere between 5 to 20 minutes, depending on how big your level is, depending on how big your resolution is when you set it here, how much ambient occlusion you got going on. It really varies. So what I'm going to do is I already have a scene set up after I've baked the lights, and let's see the results of that. So my lights just got through finished baking, and I don't really see a difference. Oh wow, I'm starting to have shadows now. Notice how we didn't have real-time shadows before, but during the light bake we did. Let's just press play and let's take a tour of my level with baked light maps. Notice how I have hard shadows on all the really dimly lit, really dim area, but with strong light sources. It's giving us these nice atmospheric shadows, really giving you dimension of the level. We have nice ambient occlusion in between all the cracks of the area. Pretty hard to see that maybe. It's a thin little shadow where two surfaces come together. We're walking around. It's a lot more atmospheric in here. We come into and we have a nice set of shadows inside of our room. Even our papers are starting to cast shadows on the ground, as you can see right there. Our control panels have shadows. And right now, I have my exit area lit up really high, drawing the player to it. Lights are a nice, easy way to direct the player where to travel within your scene. And our level is effectively lit and ready to be played now. In the next video, we're going to go over how we can add some really cool particle effects to spice up our level just even a little bit more. Thanks.